Good afternoon. I am really looking forward to this training today because I think that if you can master asking the right questions at the right time, the rest of your sales presentation should really come together so much better, so much smoother. Your prospects will engage with you better. Overall, you'll have a lot less objections at the end. And at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants, less objections, or how about no objections? Um, and you can really do that. You can really accomplish that by just digging deeper and asking really good rapport building questions at the beginning. And when I say rapport building questions, I am not talking about, oh, you have kids? How many kids do you have? Where do they live? How's the weather? How long have you lived in Chicago? Like, those are all very superficial rapport building questions, which aren't necessarily bad, but they're really not relevant to your conversation and the direction in which you want it to go, right? So if you want to maintain control, you also need to maintain the tone and the direction of how the call is going to go. And so the questions that you ask are very, very important. And when we look at the presentation for selling final expense, whether you're in the field or over the phone, it's typically broken down into three categories. You have your introduction, your fact finding section. You kind of really need to figure out somebody's why. Maybe you have a checklist of questions that you always ask. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just have a simple few questions that you always go to. But to be honest, that part of the presentation is everything. It is everything. It's what will make or break you getting the sale at the end. I was listening to a webinar, a sales training from somebody else a couple days ago, and they used a phrase that I loved. So I'm going to share it with you. And it was ditch the pitch. And I think that is so important for you to remember, because if you're just sitting there pitching your product, talking about how great your company is and how amazing your product is, and it has really nothing to do with your customer, you haven't asked them enough questions for them to find value in that product, or that product isn't actually solving their problems because you haven't asked enough questions to figure out what their problems actually are, then it's just going to make them, pull away and think you're just no different than any other salesperson that they're going to talk to. They're just going to wait for you to get to the price, tell you they want to think about it, and you'll probably never talk to them again. That's, the majority of the conversations that don't go well don't end in the sale. And then you don't end up doing your customer a service because they've left that call without insurance. The second part, is your presentation. I don't want you to think that you shouldn't be presenting your product, but it really should be intertwined in conversation, and it should be a dialogue that goes back and forth between you and the customer, interweaving the relevance of how their problems that you've discovered in the first 10, 15 minutes will be solved with your product, because you know so much about them now that it makes sense. Third part is actually, your close, and it doesn't really feel like a close when you have done part A and part B. So when you get to the close, it just happens, right? It's just a natural, we're just picking a price that makes sense. They're asking you, what method of payment can I use, before you've even given them pricing. And I'm sure everyone has had those conversations where it just felt like a lay down, but really you did the work, right? You did the work, you had the conversation. There wasn't a lot of silence on the customer's part. You guys were having a dialogue, and it was a fully engaging conversation where you left and they left feeling, happy and fulfilled. That's how your conversation should be. The last thing you want to do is have a silent prospect. And the other thing that really stuck out at me when I was listening to the training, and yes, I take training too all the time, was stop focusing so much on your outcome, right? If you're focusing so much on your outcome, or with the expectation of getting the sale, it will affect your income, right? Because that means you're more worried about yourself and paying your bills and being at the top of your leaderboard or selling, X amount and what your goals were for that day. You're more worried about your outcome than you are about the customer. So when you let go of the pressure of the outcome, you watch your income will actually increase. Okay, so we are going to focus on breaking down questions, asking the right questions at the right time. And if you see my gaze look up, it's because I have our team script at my other monitor. And so I'm just going to be referencing it. And the script is set up in a way to where it has a ton of questions that you can ask the customers to figure out why they inquired, if they have existing insurance. But the mistake people are making is they're just taking the surface answer that they're given, writing it down. Hopefully you're even doing that, writing it down, and then, checking the box and moving on to the next question. And you are missing out on a boatload of opportunity that you could be gathering just simply by asking a few more questions. So we're going to go over what some of those could be, give you some stories, and hopefully you can put that into practice for yourself. So one of the first questions I always ask when I've had permission to engage, right? This is after I've overcome the first 10 seconds of my phone call to make sure they actually want to talk to me. I always start out by letting them know what I'm going to do. I don't just go right out of the gate and start asking people questions like an interrogator. I'll say something like, okay, Mr. Customer, at this point, I'm going to start out by asking you a few questions. So that way I can get a better understanding of what you're looking for, what you might need, and make sure I can even help you, right? Make sure that I can even help you. And I do that so that way I'm not thinking that I'm this 10,000 pound gorilla and I'm automatically going to know that, I'm here to sell them. I'm here to learn about why they've inquired and identify if I can help them in the first place. So that's really important. You don't want to skip that part. And then I always start by asking them if they have any existing life insurance. And it doesn't matter what they say, yes or no, whatever their answer is, I have a lot more questions I'm going to be asking them to get them to open up to me. So if they say no, I'll ask them, have you ever had any life insurance? Because I want to know if they've felt in the past that maybe life insurance was important and the reason that they don't have it anymore, right? So I'll ask them, have you ever had it in the past before? I might ask them, how long has it been since the time they've had it until now? Like, how long have they been without? I'll try to ask them, like, what was the reason they let it go? They might volunteer that information. They might say the payments went too high. They might tell me they had a term policy that canceled. They might tell me they had it with their job and they retired and they no longer have it anymore. No matter what they say, I'm going to take that information and that answer, and I'm going to reword it in the form of a question. So if they say, well, I had it through my job, but when I retired, I lost my benefits, and and that's been that. So I'll ask them, oh, that's terrible. How long ago was that? I want to get a gauge of time frame of how long they've been without. Oh, it was just, a year or two ago. Okay, well, that's a decent amount of time to be without insurance. So just curious, what is it about, now? You've been without it for a couple of years. What is it about now that feels like it's the right time to look into it? And let them tell me what their answer is, right? Because I want to get them to tell me what's in their head, like what they're not going to volunteer to tell me. I have to pull it out of them. So let's say they do have insurance. If they do have insurance, fantastic. The number one mistake I hear agents making when someone tells them they have insurance is this. Well, is it term or whole life? That is a terrible thing to say. If you say it, don't ever say that again. The reason you don't want to say, well, is it term or whole life, is because, guys, half the time they don't even know what they have. So now you're putting your poor customer on the spot, answering a question they're kind of uncomfortable answering because they really don't understand insurance in the first place. And we already know that's true because further down the script, we're going to be talking about the difference between term and whole life and asking them if they know. And even when they say they do know, when we ask them to tell us what they know, right? We say it in a nice way. We say, oh, perfect, just so that we're on the same page. What is your understanding on the difference between the two? 9 times out of 10, they don't know the difference anyway. So why would you ask a question, is it term or whole life, when you know 99% of the people out there don't even know what the difference is? So that is a confrontational question that you got to stop asking. Okay, so they say yes, they have insurance. First thing you want to do is congratulate them. That is fantastic. You are 10 steps ahead of most people. So were you thinking that maybe you don't have enough coverage for what you want to take care of? Or are you thinking of possibly replacing what you have? Right? Because now I'm trying to gauge where they're at and why they've inquired when they already have insurance. So now they're going to tell you, and you're going to get more information, and you're going to ask more questions based upon how they answer that question. Don't just stop at the surface answer that they give you. Even if they say, well, I think maybe it's not enough. Okay, well, don't just take that and move on. You're going to have to probe even deeper. You're going to have to go fishing, right, for more information. So I don't think I have enough. Okay, that's understandable. It seems like you're worried that you may not have enough coverage to cover some expenses. What expenses are you looking to cover if you were to pass away? And then let them tell you, what they're looking to cover. And if they say, well, for my funeral, okay, perfect. So you're looking to cover your funeral. Are there any other expenses you want to make sure get taken care of? And I'm going to pause here for a second because another mistake you're making is when you ask a question like, what expenses are you looking to take care of when you pass away? You're answering it for them. And this is what you're doing. So what expenses are you looking to cover in the event you were to pass away? Is it for funeral costs and final expenses? Right? So you don't want to volunteer the answer. You want them to tell you. That's very important in the process of this, in the psychology of this. You have to get them to tell you. You don't want to give them the answers. So let them tell you. Yeah, is there any other expenses besides, the funeral that you want to make sure are covered? No, just the funeral. Okay, that's fine. And you can bring up other things later, whether it's debt or hospital bills or whatever it is. You have plenty of time and opportunity to bring that stuff up later. Right now, we're just setting the foundation for what's important to your customer and making sure that you can help them, which 9 times out of 10 you can. But at this point, you have to tell yourself, well, I don't even know if I can help you right now. So I have to make sure I ask a whole lot of questions and really make sure that I come across asking them in a genuine way, right? Not as just someone reading questions off a piece of paper. Okay, so you think you may not have enough coverage to take care of your final expenses. So tell me, are you thinking that you want a traditional burial or maybe a cremation? And it doesn't matter what they tell you, whether it's cremation or burial, you want to ask them how they came up with that decision because you're going to get a lot of information from that. So they say burial. Oh, fantastic. What about burial has you leaning towards that direction? Or how did you come up with, what made you decide to choose burial? Same with cremation. Oh, that's fantastic. What made you choose cremation? And I know a lot of people automatically assume it's because of cost, but a lot of times it may not be. And just yesterday, I had someone that wanted cremation, and I asked her, I said something like, okay, fantastic. So just out of curiosity, what made you choose cremation? And honestly, I was expecting her to say cost, but she didn't. She said, well, it's really important to me that my ashes get spread in the ocean. She lives in Hawaii. And she wants her daughter and her grandkids to go out in a canoe in the ocean by her house and spread her ashes because it's a very sacred and beautiful place for her to be. So that was incredibly important to her. And without me asking why she came up with that decision for cremation, I'm not sure I would have ever found that out. And a little bit later in the conversation, still in the fact finding portion of it, we haven't even talked about me or what I offer or my company at all. I said, so let me ask you. And she happened to never have insurance. I said, so you haven't had life insurance before. Um, you're in your late 50s now. You're thinking it may be, the time to start looking at it. So, what happens if you end up just putting it off, like most people do, and something happens and you pass away and your daughter doesn't have the money to pay for your cremation and honor those amazing wishes of spreading your ashes in the ocean? Because if she doesn't, the state takes over and just cremates your body with a ton of other bodies and she won't get your ashes back. And she says to me, well, that's why I'm doing this now. That's why I'm doing this now. And I said, well, that's wonderful. I'm sure that not only are you going to have peace of mind that your final wishes will be carried out, but you'll also have peace of mind that your daughter and grandkids won't have to come out of pocket and pay for it. So I think that's beautiful. And thank you for sharing that with me. So we probably talked for a good 15, 20 minutes before I even talked about who I represent. Before we talked about the difference between term and whole life, before we talked about the Guardian Society and how we'd be there to negotiate pricing and provide her daughter with immediate payout. All of that stuff came so natural in the conversation that I was able to interweave stories that she told me about her family to make that presentation part, right, the pitch part, really relevant and conversational. I'm just going to scroll up and look at a couple other questions we have here. Let's see. I mean, there's a how long have you been thinking about putting something in place for yourself, which a lot of these bullet point questions can sometimes be your sub questions when you are gathering information. But if they're not, if you're asking them in bullet point fashion, and you ask that question point blank, and someone says, doesn't matter what they say, let's just say, I recently started looking. Okay, well, what is it about this time in your life that had you thinking that you should start looking at this now? Well, I don't know. I'm just getting older and I just want to make sure I put something in place. Well, I completely understand that. And do you know anybody, in your life that's passed away without insurance? Or have you had any experience with anybody passing away recently? Or just trying to probe a little bit more, right? To try to see where that's coming from, right? She didn't just wake up one day, age 55, and decide, I'm going to look at life insurance today, right? So we have to do a little bit of work to uncover the real reason for why someone's inquiring, because people aren't going to be that vulnerable, right out of the gates. They're not going to just open up because you're asking them questions, right? We have to kind of boost people's ego a little bit. We have to be genuine. We have to sound like we care and act like we care. And hopefully you actually do care, right? Because if you actually do care, that's going to come out automatically. You don't have to try hard or at all to sound genuine. So I encourage you guys to take whatever questions you have on your, questionnaires that you use, and take your answers that you get and use that to uncover even more. And I wish I had my team on the call today so I can have people unmute and volunteer some additional questions so we could come up with even more examples. But I didn't want to pull everybody off the phones today for a late afternoon training. Let's see if there's anything else I can find. So I guess one more I'll probably leave you with would be when someone asks who will be in charge of your final arrangements when the time comes. This one is a very easy one where people kind of stay surface. So a lot of times people will say, either my husband or my wife or my kids. And the most common response is, oh, you have kids? Wonderful. How many do you have? How old are they? Where do they live? Do you see them much? Right? Those are very common questions, which are fine. In those types of questioning is a perfect opportunity for you to share information about yourself. And so I always, when people tell me they have adult children, I typically say, I bet I'm around the same age as your kids. I'm in my 40s. How old are your kids? And then I'll share information about how nice it is knowing that even though both my husband and I work and we might be in a position to pay for our parents' funeral when they pass, we're still raising young kids and we live day to day just like everybody else. And it sure would be hard to just have to come up with an additional $5,000 or $10,000 to pay for a funeral, when it's really nice having peace of mind knowing that my parents already have that taken care of for us. And it's really great that you're thinking about doing the same. And compliment them on that by using information about yourself so that you humanize yourself, right? You always want to try to connect on a human level as well, to make yourself less of a salesperson. So yes, you're asking very relevant, pointed questions to try to get them to open up with you and tell you their why. Maybe some consequence questions about what would happen if they decided to put it off. But connecting with them too and sharing your story and sharing information about yourself is always going to be helpful. It can never hurt. So your goal is to try to get to at least 10 minutes before you move on to talk about who your company is and what we offer. I would even go as far as say 15, 20 minutes if you can go that far. And that's what I encourage you guys to do today and moving forward. And I look forward to having another successful end of week.